If you guys enjoy what I do, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel and it's free and easy to do. Before we get started with today's video, I have an announcement to make. After years of telling other people's stories, I finally released one of my own. My novel Eternal Reign is available now in both ebook and paperback format for those of you who are like me and prefer to collect physical media. You can grab a copy right now on Amazon through the link in the description of this video. And now back to our regularly scheduled program. Admiral Merlwyb has sent one of her people to Razat Han to get some help because a blasphemy has appeared out in La Noscea, and it's causing a few problems. She's gotten the Maelstrom together to deal with the thing, but she doesn't know all that much about it, which is why she could use your help. The Warrior of Light is not one to ignore a request for help, especially not from someone like the Admiral, so he immediately makes his way over to Limsa Lominsa. She knows you're busy, so she gets her people to fill you in right away. A few days ago, one of her men sent a report from Skull Valley about a creature that was way different from anything he'd seen before. He had no idea what the thing was, but the Sahagin made the connection between the weird creature and the monsters that started appearing during the final days. Since the Laminsans had been taking care of the Sahagins tempered, they've been getting a better working relationship with the Beastmen. One of the groups of Sahagins said that they've seen quite a few of their people turn into monsters right in front of their eyes, and the biggest of these blasphemies is running around somewhere in the area. It hasn't been seen anywhere near the city, and the Admiral wants to keep it that way, so she wants the creature dealt with fast. Unfortunately, they haven't had much luck seeking the thing out since they can't just send any old soldiers out after it, because they might end up turning into blasphemies too, which won't exactly solve the problem. That's why the Admiral decided to lead the investigation herself and only involve a handful of people, one of them obviously being you. Once the Warrior of Light lets her know that he's on board, the two of them head off to meet with the Sahagin to start the hunt for the blasphemy. The Beastmen are late to the meeting, which Merlwyb says isn't exactly like them, which means something bad probably happened. So the two of you head off into the spawning grounds just in time to see the people who were supposed to meet you being attacked by blasphemies. The two of you rescue the Sahagin, then head off somewhere safer to talk. Noel, the Sahagin that you were supposed to meet, is glad that you came when you did since he would have been quite dead without you. But he does feel bad for the monsters that you killed since they had been some of his people up until they randomly transformed. He had thought his people had been hit by some type of curse, but when no one could cure them, he realized that something else had happened. Once the Warrior of Light lets him know what blasphemies are and how anyone can turn into one of the things if they're feeling strong negative emotions, he realizes just how not good the situation actually is. So far, the only people in the area who've been affected are the Sahagin, and the Admiral wants to know why. Noel figures it has something to do with the crushing tide. They're a group of Sahagin that recently formed after their queen, the Indigo Matriarch, got very sick. It didn't take long for her to die from her illness. It was a sad moment, but since their old queen was against the tribe working with the Laminsans, her dying made more of the Sahagin decide to work with their former enemy. There are still quite a few who hate the Laminsans, which is understandable considering their history, and they join together to form the Crushing Tide, who plan on summoning Leviathan again to re-temper the Sahagin and stop them from working with the Laminsans. The good news is that they don't have enough crystals to do it yet, so they're starting to get desperate, which could be what led to the rise of blasphemies. Noel knows that the people he had seen turn had recently talked to the Crushing Tide members. Even though they disagree on how to move forward, that doesn't mean they plan on abandoning the members of the extremist group, not if they don't have to. The situation is delicate since trying to convince them that their plan is stupid might make them turn, but doing nothing could cause everyone to have to deal with Leviathan again. At the moment, none of the Tide are tempered, so they can be talked down. And since the Warrior of Light did deal with Leviathan in the past, having him as a part of the team makes the situation a little less dangerous, and it gives everyone time to plan on how to move forward. It doesn't take long for the Sahagin and the Admiral to figure out what to do next. The two groups will work together and hunt for the blasphemy, and they'll fight it together when they see it. And they'll also set up a meeting with the Crushing Tide and try to convince them to stop with the whole primal summoning thing. That second part is probably a waste of time, but if you end up having to kill them all, at least you'll be able to say that you tried to talk it out first. Noel has already sent a message to Dao, the leader of the Crushing Tide, and he's agreed to at least talk to the Admiral. She's about to head to the meeting, but she wants you to tag along just in case things get all stabby, which is likely. Dao doesn't show up to the meeting spot, so the Warrior of Light and Merlwyb head into the spawning grounds to hunt him down. None of his people are all that happy to see your kind in the area, but they eventually point you in Dao's direction. The priest isn't exactly interested in peace talks, especially since his people don't really have a reason to trust the Laminsans, but he decides to come to an official meeting to negotiate. Since that turned out okay, the Admiral tells Noel to gather his people for the meeting. Dao and his people show up, but they're not exactly being friendly, so Merlewilp dives right into the conversation about the blasphemies and how they're a danger to both the Lamencents and the Sahagin. Even though the two groups have had problems in the past, the Lamencents have helped cure the Sahagin of tempering, which has proved that they are at least trying to work together with them. Since the Crushing Tide's goal is making sure that their people have a future, working with the Lamencents to deal with the blasphemy is their best chance. At least it would be if Dao believed that the Lamencents were telling the truth. The only non-Sahagin he trusts are the Serpent Reavers, and those are people who were tempered by Leviathan, and the only way he'll trust the rest is if they're all tempered. In other words, he'll work with them once they're his slaves. Noel thinks that's insane, but the fact that he's going against their god doesn't sit well with Dao or the Crushing Tide. Seeing one of their own side with the Lamencents over their own people makes the two Sahagin with Dao turn into blasphemies. Dao doesn't think that's a bad thing. He actually thinks that their transformation is a gift from Leviathan. One of the new creatures heads off toward Elport, so Merlewilp goes after it while the Warrior of Light deals with the other one. Dao leaves and the crazy Sahagin thinks it'll be a good thing if all of his people turn into blasphemies, which means he definitely has to die before this all is over. But that'll have to wait until you deal with the new creature. After the Warrior of Light deals with his, he goes to check on the Admiral. She's taking care of hers too, but not before it killed one of the Sahagin. She feels bad about that, but Noel doesn't blame her. He's more worried about why Dao seems so happy that his people transformed. This goes way beyond tempering people, and if the Crushing Tide are trying to use blasphemies as weapons, then there's no chance of negotiating with them at all, which means you still have them and the much more powerful monster to deal with. Since the situation has the potential to end up far worse than the Admiral had thought, she decides to get the Maelstrom to hunt for the blasphemy out at sea to make the search go faster. But if it is a transformed Sahagin, it might be too deep in the ocean for her people to find, so Noel agrees to have his people search the deepest parts of the ocean for the creature, which means it's time to head back to the city so the Admiral can set things up. While she's getting everything organized, word comes in that some Sahagin attacked a Lamencent ship. That ship was carrying a lot of crystals that the Kobolds had sent over. That means it's a good chance that they are about to try to summon Leviathan. So the Warrior of Light and the Admiral head off to meet Dao so they can come up with a plan to stop the Primal before it gets summoned. Even with the amount of crystals that they stole, Noel doesn't think they have enough to summon Leviathan, mainly because they haven't had him appear and try to flood the city yet. But they're close, which is bad for both the Lamencents who don't want to get drowned and the Sahagin who don't want to get turned back into the Primal's pets. Unfortunately, Merlewilp can't afford to take people off of the blasphemy hunt to go after the Crushing Tide, since both threats are equally bad, but getting the three pirate groups or the Yellow Jackets involved will lead to the panic that she didn't want to hit the city, since that could cause her people to start transforming. So that leaves only one option, and that's getting the company of heroes back together. The group had handled primals quite a few times, which would make them more than a little useful, but they disbanded over 5 years ago, and there's no telling where their commander is. The Admiral doesn't know how willing they'll be to fight without their leader, but it's more than worth a shot, so she gives Wisecat a call to see if he'll gather the team while Noel and the other Sahagin keep searching for the blasphemy. While she wasn't expecting it to work, Merlewilp's call to the company of heroes actually caused them all minus their leader to show up. They are all people that the Warrior of Light has dealt with in some capacity or another, especially Brayflox, everyone's favorite goblin, and Wisecat, the big Roganin who's always out in Costa del Sol. Landonil, the overly violent and semi-insane Ellison, Uodnoon, and the alcohol expert Shamani Lamani all show up, and apparently none of their personalities have changed, even though they haven't been together in years. They came because the Admiral asked, but none of them expected her to be calling to reform the company of heroes. They want to know why, so she fills them in on the current situation. Wisecat thinks the situation is bad enough that their group would be needed, but since their commander's last order was to disband the group, he's not eager to go against it. Plus, without their leader, they're not really as good of a team as they used to be. Since they're looking for a capable leader to follow, Merlewilp nominates the Warrior of Light, since it goes without saying that he's more than capable. They all agree to follow the Warrior of Light, but they still wouldn't mind having their old commander around. Since he had gone his own way so they could make their own way in the world, none of them really think they'll ever see the man again. There's no real time to worry about finding him anyway. Merlewilp wants the company of heroes to split up and hunt for the blasphemy and stop the Crushing Tide from summoning the Primal. They all have different skills, so after learning what each one of them can do, the Warrior of Light sends them off to get started. While they're doing that, the Admiral checks with Noel to see if his people have found the Crushing Tide's hideout. She contacts them at a good time, because the Crushing Tide are attacking Candlekeep Quay. The Warrior of Light sends a few members of the company out to help drive the crushing tide off, and they manage to not only help clear out the attackers, but they capture a few of them alive. With a little bit of creative interrogation, mainly giving the Sahagin some very expensive liquor, they start telling you all everything. They had attacked the Quay because Dao said that taking it would give them a better position to attack the city. He doesn't have nearly the numbers he needs to attack the city, but he's confident that he can take it because he has the blasphemy. He's on an island to the south, and that's not only where the blasphemy is, but it's where he plans on summoning Leviathan. It's hard to believe that he's managed to control that monster, but if he did, things won't be easy to deal with, so you all head over to the island prepared for things to be very, very bad. When the Warrior of Light and his crew get to the island, they find Dao and the blasphemy, and the thing is humongous. Everyone gets ready to fight, but things go sideways when the Echo starts to take over the Warrior of Light. He tries to fight it off, but he can't, so while he's trapped in a vision, the others try to keep him alive. He sees Dao talking to the Sahagin's former matriarch, telling her how a lot of her people are starting to work with the Lamencents. It's almost time for her to produce the next generation of Sahagin, but that can't happen if her people are divided, and when more of her people come in telling her that it's time to stop worshipping Leviathan and move into a new era, she's almost convinced that she might need to support the change, but Dao's words makes her second guess herself, and that makes her turn into the giant blasphemy. The vision ends and the Warrior of Light wakes up just in time for the creature to hit the entire group with an attack that paralyzes them all. It gets ready to hit you all again, and since you can't exactly block it, you'd all definitely die if the attack goes off. Fortunately, someone interrupts it, which gives the company of heroes time to drop a smoke bomb so you can all run away. No one is happy about the fact that you all got spanked by the monster, but the fact that the thing was able to paralyze you all made the outcome of the fight make sense. The Warrior of Light did find out where the creature came from, and when he shares the information, Noel gets even angrier at Dao for making their queen turn into a monster. That's gonna complicate things, because if you do kill the blasphemy, you'll be killing the Sahagin's queen. Noel and the other Sahagin won't be able to bring themselves to fight her, but that's a problem for another day. The thing the company wants to figure out first is who fired the gunshot that gave you all the chance to escape. They don't have an answer for that either, but the Admiral says that you all have another problem. The blasphemy has left the island, and it's out in the open sea now, so there's no telling when it will start attacking people. Merlewip's gonna keep her people searching for it, but if you don't find a way to stop its attack, the next time you find it won't be any different from the last. Wisecat thinks he'll be able to figure something out. The company of heroes has a pretty good track record when it comes to finding enemies' weaknesses, and since you've seen that the blasphemy can absorb ether, they have something to work with. There's a lot of work left to do, and the Admiral figures that getting a little more help wouldn't hurt. She thinks she may be able to track down the company's former commander, so she's gonna try something. After everyone recovers from their beating, the Warrior of Light gets a call from Wisecat, who has an idea about how to take down the monster, so he heads over to Costa del Sol to see what the man's got to say. Wisecat actually hasn't figured out a way to deal with the blasphemy, but he figures that if you could get their old commander to join in the fight, he might be able to figure out a way to do it. He was the reason the company had been able to take down Leviathan and Titan. The problem is he was kind of crazy and weird. He liked to work from the shadows, which is why he hasn't been seen since the company disbanded. But Wisecat is pretty sure that the man's been watching them. That doesn't mean he'll help them out though. But if you gave him an order as the company's new commander, then he might. In the old days, if they whistled at the fork in the road to the north of Costa del Sol, the commander would show up, eventually. Since it's worth a try, the Warrior of Light does it, and Lawrence actually does show up. He knows who you are, since most people do, and he's been watching his old team. He is a little surprised that so many people have decided to look for him after all of these years. He already figured that you want him to help with the blasphemy, and since his specialty is supporting shooting people from very far away, he'll be a great addition to the team. Since Lawrence knows a lot about you and you know absolutely nothing about him, he decides to tell you a little bit about his story. Back in the old pirate days, the League of Lost Bastards were the top dogs, and both he and Merlewip were a part of that crew, serving under Merlewip's dad Blowfist. They were all very close, so he was there when Blowfist saved them from Leviathan and got tempered and forced Merlewip to kill him. Not long after that, Merlewip became the Admiral and changed the way things were done in Lenosha, and Lawrence made it a point to help her, in secret of course. He told you all of that to let you know that he appreciates what you're doing, and he'll be there to help you when you need him. Wisecat's glad to hear that, but he thinks it'll be a good idea to not tell the rest of the company, mainly because Landonil may try to stab Lawrence if he sees him. Since that's been taken care of, what's left is to lead the blasphemy somewhere else where you can deal with it, Finding the thing doesn't take long. Since it was the Sahagin queen, Rio, someone who's always been helping out the Scions, watched the spawning grounds and saw that the creature was moving around underwater. So he had the Maelstrom use their ships and some cannonballs to lure the creature to Sastasha. That's a good place to fight it since it's far enough away from the city to avoid drawing innocent people into the fight. The company's excited for their rematch, and Merlewip definitely won't let you all fight alone, so you all meet up outside of the Drowning Wench to get ready. Noel apologizes for the fact that his people won't be able to bring themselves to fight the monster since it used to be their mother, but he doesn't blame any of you for doing what needs to be done. A call comes in from Rio saying that the Crushing Tide are heading to Sastasha, which means it's time for you all to head over there. The Crushing Tide beats you all there, but you make it just in time to see Dao realize that you can't work with the blasphemy, since once it changes, the person that it used to be is completely gone. He learns that lesson when the thing stomps him to death. It does drive the point home for the other Sahagin, who finally realize that the whole blasphemy transformation thing is not in fact a good thing. After seeing that, they want to help you fight it, but since Merlewip knows how hard it is to have to put down a corrupted parent, she sends them away so you all can deal with it yourselves. The good thing is Lawrence keeps his word and shows up, and he did figure out how to deal with the blasphemy's paralysis technique. Once he shows the Warrior of Light and Merlewip how to do it, it finally gives you a fighting chance against the creature. It apparently has a whole lot of other techniques, including calling on other blasphemies to join in the fight. The rest of the company of heroes show up to help even out the playing field, but even all of you together aren't enough. It's not until the rest of the Sahagin show up with a few of their siege engines do you finally all put an end to the monster. After seeing how strong Merlewip and the others actually are, the Crushing Tide members realize that at any moment the Lamensons could have just wiped them out. They don't understand why she didn't just solve her problem that way. She hadn't, for the simple reason that she wants their people to work together. And even though Dao didn't believe her, she really does mean it. As more proof, she tells them that whenever they choose their next queen and find a spot of land that will work as a good spot to raise their young, the people of Lamensa will make sure that no one invades their territory. Of course, there will be a bit of paperwork and negotiating involved, but since the kobolds are already on board, it shouldn't be too hard to iron out the details. At the very least, the Sahagin are willing to try. While that was being taken care of, Lawrence tries to sneak off, but his former comrades aren't letting him wander off this time and they drag him back to Limsa with the rest of you. They're all pretty mad at him for not joining in the fight earlier, but he points out that if he had, Landonil at least would have been upset that he interfered. The man admits that he was going to be mad regardless since Lawrence had disappeared right when the two of them were supposed to have a duel. The truth is, Lawrence didn't actually plan on showing up late or missing out on their duel. He just has a very bad sense of direction. He had actually showed up for the duel, but it took him 6 days to find the spot. Landonil wants to have the duel right then and there since he finally has the man in front of him. But if he started a fight in the middle of the city, I'm pretty sure that Merlewip would have shot him. Either way, their work is done, so the company of heroes disbands yet again, and the Admiral heads off to get back to her job of guiding her people to the future, while the Warrior of Light heads back to Razad Han to let the delegate know that the situation's been dealt with, and things are safe. For now. In Razad Han, a representative has been sent by Lord Hien to get some help hunting a monster that he thinks is one of the blasphemies. His people have done well keeping the people of Doma safe for the most part, but this creature is a flyer, and it's a little difficult for shinobi and samurai to fight something that stays out of range. But since the Warrior of Light is pretty skilled at shooting things down from a distance, your help would be extremely useful. Hien's a good friend, so the Warrior of Light makes her way to the Doman Enclave to meet up with him and Yugiri, who's always with the man. They should really just get married and get it over with. The pair had expected to be sent help, but they hadn't expected it to be you. Of course, they're not going to look a gift horse in the mouth, so they get straight into explaining the situation. Right after they got word of the people in Thavnir turning into monsters, the same thing happened to a woman in Isari. The monster she became attacked a villager and flew off to who knows where. Turns out the person she killed was one of the prisoners they had gotten back in the exchange with Asahi and the Empire. The thing needs to be dealt with, but like his messenger said, it can fly, so they wanted someone who could shoot it down. As expected, that one creature isn't the only one to appear. A lot of people have changed, and the number of new blasphemies is increasing every day. That tends to happen a lot when all it takes to be changed is being afraid or depressed or hopeless, which means just wiping out the blasphemies won't solve the problem. While you're all trying to figure out what to do, a man comes running up screaming about how someone in the village turned, and even though no one got hurt, the people are panicking. That could lead to more people turning into monsters, so you all head off to deal with the creature. And unfortunately, since there's no way to cure them, that means you'll have to put it down permanently. You catch it while it's in the process of attacking a little boy, but he's not happy that you saved him since the monster you killed was his brother. Ian tries to explain to the boy that the monster wasn't his brother anymore, but the boy calls you all murderers and runs off. Issei had been looking for the boy whose name is Tonbo since he had run off after the monster. His brother was the only family he had left since his dad had been forced into the Empire's army where he died, and their life hadn't exactly been easy before under Yotsuyu, since calling her the proper name for a female dog wouldn't be nearly a strong enough word to describe her. The brothers had spent a lot of time praying that Hien would get their family back together, or at least deal with Yotsuyu. But when she died because of her brother and they found out their dad was gone, the boys were left with nothing. Hien understands why the boy hates him. He killed his brother even if it was by using the Warrior of Light, and he had spared Yotsuyu, so it all looks pretty bad. But Hien, being the problem solver that he is, promises to make things better for Tonbo and the people of Doma. But doing that will take a plan, so you all head back to the Doman Enclave. After thinking about Tonbo's story, Hien realizes that even though they freed a lot of prisoners from the Empire, the people didn't really get closure since they never got to see Yotsuyu get punished. He failed his people, and he can't understand why some of them hate him, but something has to be done about that before more of them turn into monsters. Some people are obviously more at risk than others, so Hien decides that the best way to figure out who's in the most danger is by going around talking to the people to see who seems to be the most distressed. People usually know their neighbors pretty well, so that's not a bad idea. While Hien does that, Yugiri and the other shinobi will hunt down the missing blasphemy. They brought you to help fight, not necessarily hunt, so the Warrior of Light gets a small break. When she checks back in with Yugiri, her people still haven't found the creature, but the good news is that no new people have transformed into monsters. Hien constantly being in the midst of his people is likely helping with that, but Yugiri thinks he may be overdoing it a bit and decides to go and check on him. Since you're there, you decide to tag along. He wasn't exactly hard to find, but his mission hasn't really been going as good as he had hoped, mainly because the people of Isari refuse to speak to him at all. He doesn't really know why they're acting like that, but he figures that the two of you might have a better chance of finding out. At least you will if Yugiri puts on a disguise, because her face is about as well known as Hien's. When you talk to some of the villagers, the problem is immediately made obvious. They don't think they got attacked by a blasphemy at all. They think it was a kami named Izanami, one that, unlike Hien, actually cares about the people. Others do understand that the thing is a monster, one that came from a young woman who prayed every day for her husband to come back, only for it to never happen. That loss made Kisai, the woman's stepmother, think that she had become a kami since she really believed in the gods. It's a little crazy to think that her daughter Minato randomly just turned into a god, but it seems like more people in Isari believe like she does than not, which is why they don't like Hien. Hien gets it, but having the people believe a blasphemy is a god is a major problem, because what do you think the people will do if someone attacks their god? The particular kami that they think it is called Izanami, which is the god of life and death. She created the nation of Doma and takes the souls of the dead to the underworld. The people see her as a symbol of hope for something better, and killing her would remove that hope, which will likely create a whole village full of blasphemies. From what Yugiri heard, this Kisai woman can actually talk to the dead, and she's about to gather the people together to prove it. It'll be a good opportunity to see just how crazy the people are, and since Hien can't go, the Warrior of Light and Yugiri go to see. Kisai is an elderly Aori woman, and while it seems crazy, it looks like she actually can channel the dead. Or she's just a really good con artist who's using her acting skills to convince the people that the blasphemy will help put the tortured souls of the people's lost family members to rest. The people, including the young boy Tonbo, are all fully convinced by the woman, so the two of you go to tell Hien just how bad the situation is. He doesn't believe the woman is able to let people talk to the dead at all, but what he believes doesn't change the fact that most of the people of Isari do. The people were suffering, and he couldn't do anything about it, so they turned elsewhere, and whether they're being conned or not, Kisai's antics have kept the people from transforming. Being able to talk to lost family members would make people happy, but Kisai is justifying the blasphemy killing people, saying it will help restore order, so it seems strange that the people would be okay with that. While you're all discussing the insanity, a woman starts screaming because the blasphemy has come back. You all race off to fight it, but when you get there it's gone, and a woman is standing beside a man who the monster had killed. He was one of the prisoners who had been recovered from Garlemald. That means both of the blasphemy's victims were from that group, which means it's likely targeting them for some reason. Kisai, however, thinks differently and shows up denying that the thing is a blasphemy and claiming that her stepdaughter was the chosen vessel of Izanami. She says she saw it happen, and those words caused the Echo to show the Warrior of Light that very moment. Minato was upset, rightfully so, at Yotsuyu for being spared and her husband being conscripted into the Empire's army, only to die so far away that she'll never really know what happened to him. Hien couldn't even give her the small bit of closure that would come from knowing how her husband spent his final moments, and she feels worse every time she sees people come home to make their families whole. Kisai tried to convince her that Izanami would make everything better, but the woman didn't believe her, and she transformed into a blasphemy then and there and flew off. Kisai thinks Izanami took the girl's body so she could give her peace and bring it to the rest of the people, something she can't believe Hien would be against. But considering the fact that 2 people who had just made it back home have been killed by the thing, Hien is pretty sure it's not any kami that he would worship. He doesn't think the gods are that cruel, but Kisai thinks it's ironic that he'd talk about cruelty when he made the people watch Yotsuyu walk around free and clear after everything she had done, including sending Kisai's husband and son off to Garlemald to die. The fact that he put the well-being of the people of Doma's tormentor over them makes it hard for the people to put their faith in him. I actually agree with her. They should have executed Yotsuyu for her crimes regardless of the fact that she lost her memory, which did happen because she dropped a building on you all, and Hien's actions make it easier for Kisai to galvanize the people against him. Whether they hate him or not, he still plans on setting up the funeral for Izanami's latest victim after he finds out why you looked like you were about to throw up when Kisai started talking. He didn't know about your visions, but after you tell him what you watched happen to Kisai and Minato, he can understand why the woman went crazy. Losing her last family member in such a strange way while being extremely religious could make anyone end up with a warped sense of reality. Regardless of her mental state, Hien knows what you all have to do. He just hopes the woman won't stand in his way. Back at the Enclave, Hien has decided that since the conscripts are Izanami's targets, you all need to find them and get them someplace safe before you even start hunting the blasphemy. It doesn't take long to gather them all up, but Yugiri thinks that before you all dive into hunting the blasphemy again, you need to learn more about Kisai. She thinks the woman was born in Suino Sato, but since people from her birthplace don't really talk to her, Yugiri decided to use the Kojin to find out what she needs to. From what they told her, the people of Suino Sato weren't all that eager to talk about Kisai, which means you'll have to go there if you want to find out anything. That's not that big of a deal for you, but since she was banished, Yugiri will have to wear a disguise. If she gets caught, it could end pretty badly for both of you, but it's worth the risk, so Yugiri slips on the outfit she wore way back when you met her in A Realm Reborn and you head off. She hasn't been home in years. When she was little, she used to sneak out of Suino Sato with the other children looking for adventure and to see the fabled land of Doma, but when they got there, they saw the aftermath of the Imperial attacks. Her and the other kids ran away, but she got lost and ran into a young Hien who was training to fulfill his duty as a samurai and to protect his people. After seeing what the Empire had done, she had wanted to protect her own home too, so she started training with him. The elders of Suino Sato wouldn't listen to her about the danger the Empire posed, even though their land was underwater, so Yugiri left and became a shinobi. The story of how she met Hien was covered in a Tales from the Twilight issue that I covered on the channel, and I'll link in a card that you can click on after this video. The people of Suino Sato felt that Yugiri's actions would lead war to their doorstep, so they banished her. She doesn't blame them, and even knowing the consequences, she wouldn't change anything. She's happy to see her home again, but just ignoring the wishes of the Ruby Princess wouldn't be good for her family, so she'll just pretend to be a shinobi that works for you. With that in mind, you head down to see if the elders know anything about Kisai, like why she left Suino Sato in the first place. Turns out the woman had been a priestess who had been banished after getting on the bad side of the Ruby Princess of the time. She'd had a friend whose name was Unagi who knows the details of the whole little incident, but the problem is Unagi is Yugiri's mother, so Yugiri lets you do the talking because her parents would likely recognize her voice. Kisai had been born to a family of priests, and she was very gifted. The people expected a lot of her, but things changed after she said she could talk to the dead. At first the people didn't believe her, but she seemed to know things that she shouldn't have, which led to her getting summoned to a private audience with the Ruby Princess. No one knows what went on behind closed doors, but whatever she said made the princess so mad that she immediately had Kisai exiled. Some people think that Kisai either got caught in a lie or revealed something secret that she wasn't supposed to know. It was likely the former, because the stuff she claimed came from the dead wasn't always true. The girl could have just been a really good liar, but even back then people found some peace from her words. That's all Unagi can tell you, since she hasn't seen the woman since she was kicked out of the city. Her mom clearly sees through Yugiri's disguise, but she decides to play along and tells this quote random shinobi to deliver a message to their daughter, letting her know that they're both proud of her. Before anyone else recognizes her, the two of you leave the underwater nation. Yugiri felt pretty good after seeing that her parents are both okay, and she does hope to see them again one day without having to wear a disguise, but she has a duty to help Hien take care of Doma before she can worry about changing the laws of her homeland. While she doesn't think Hien will end up turning into a blasphemy, his job is pretty depressing, especially since the people aren't exactly happy with him. And it's not like he has any family of his own to lean on, but there's no rest for the people in charge, so you head off to let the man know what you found out about Kisai. Hearing about her past puts things in perspective for him, but it doesn't stop what needs to be done, especially when it comes to dealing with the blasphemy. Hien's talked to the Confederacy to get them to help set up watches all throughout Doma to help track down the thing, and it doesn't take long for it to get spotted near the coast. It hasn't killed anyone yet, so the Warrior of Light, Hien, and Yugiri head out to Ankoro to find out exactly where the monster is. Rasho of the Confederacy, after seeing Hien showed up in person to talk about this thing, is starting to get convinced that these blasphemies are pretty serious. His people saw it out near Shoal Rock, and it seems calm for now, which makes it seem like the thing really is only going after the Imperial conscripts. Since it's not moving much, right now is the best opportunity to kill it. So not wanting to miss this chance, you all head off to deal with it. The creature is right where they said it would be, but as soon as it sees you all, it takes off too fast for you to even get a shot off. Hien had thought since Minato had hated him in life, the blasphemy would attack him instead of running away, but apparently that wasn't the case. Apparently this is the first time that Tansui heard that Minato was the blasphemy, and that news catches him off guard since he knew the woman. Her family had tried to escape Hingashi when it was occupied by the Imperials, but their ship got sunk. Tansui and some other Confederacy members had found her in the wreckage with her dead parents, so they brought her to Ankoro and took care of her. She had clearly been through some things, because even seeing a weapon would make her start screaming. That made her a bad fit for their organization, so they brought her to Asari and found some people to take her in. A few months later, Tansui saw her on the beach with an Aori fisherman, and he knew that she'd be okay. He saw her on the beach a lot after that, so apparently she liked it, which would explain why the blasphemy came there. They keep some memories even after they transform, which could also explain why it ran away instead of fighting. Seeing Hien with his sword in hand probably freaked the monster out. That at least means that the conscripts being under heavy guard should keep them from getting attacked, but it does make it a tad difficult to fight the thing since it just runs away. Tansui would rather not fight it at all since the woman's life kinda sucked, but since it has to be done, he'll make sure that his people keep looking for it. While they look, you, Hien, and Yugiri head back to the Enclave. Unfortunately, before you can make any plans, Kisai shows up with a large group of people from Asari. They have a request. Kisai wants Hien to give her the conscripts so Izanami can kill them, which is pretty insane. Hien rightfully tells her no. I probably would have had her filled with arrows along with all of her followers, because those types of people are way too dangerous and insane to leave alive. Hien is a bit more tactful than that, and he tries to explain that you can't just kill people all willy-nilly. It's supposed to be done as a last resort. Kisai tries to bring up how Hien wrongfully spared Yotsuyu again, but he counters saying that when you all had attacked Doma Castle, he tried to kill her. Technically, she should have died, but she didn't, which had to be the will of the kami, especially since she came back with no memory. Because of that, Hien couldn't execute the woman for crimes that the new her technically didn't commit, but he understands why the people would be mad at him for that. But regardless of how they feel, he won't sacrifice people whose only crime was being enslaved by the Empire. He makes the choice even more difficult for them when he tells them that if they believe the kami want those people dead, then they need to swing the sword themselves. Once they couldn't pawn their duty off onto something else, the people decide they don't want blood on their hands, but Kisai claims it's what the souls of the dead want. However, Gosetsu shows up sporting a freshly shaved head to challenge the woman. He had heard about the woman who could talk to the dead on his travels, and he figured he'd come back to see for himself. He ran into someone else from the village who wanted to make the trip too, but they couldn't, so they sent a letter for Gosetsu to bring with him. It's for the fisherman Akitsu, and it comes from his father. He was injured in battle, so he's been having a hard time getting home, but he's fine and very much alive, which means Kisai couldn't have been talking to him, so the woman who claims she can talk to the dead was full of more crap than a gas station bathroom. Instead of admitting that she's wrong, she says that her daughter will make you all pay before she storms off. Not really knowing what else to do, the people from Isari follow her. For the moment, Hien's not worried about them, he's just happy that Gosetsu's back. Not only that, he solved the Kisai problem with a single letter. Gosetsu had heard that things were rough in Doma, and he figured that he could be useful, so he came back. He made the trip a little bit quicker after he ran into one of the so-called spirits that Kisai had talked to and found that he was very much not dead. The enormous man has had quite an adventure since he's been gone, and he starts telling Hien all about it, but he stopped when Tombo comes back and apologizes to Hien for how he had acted. He's just scared because if his brother could turn into a monster when he was older and braver than he is, then what chance does he have? He couldn't even perform the funeral rites for his dad, which makes it all that much worse. He doesn't blame Hien for that anymore, but whether he blames him or not, that doesn't make the situation any less hopeless, and exposing Kisai's lies took away even the small hope she was giving to the people. Which means Hien needs to do something to replace the hope that he took from them, and he wants Gosetsu's help with that, which the man is happy to give. They get to work planning immediately, and they manage to come up with something that they think will work. Gosetsu figures that since so many people are grieving for loved ones that they can't bury, there should be a national funeral rite held at the Swallow's Compass, where everyone who decides to show up can bring a personal item from the deceased that can be sealed away there. Spirits live inside of all things, and even in death a part of you remains in your most cherished possessions. Sealing those away in the royal mausoleum should help the lost souls of Doma find their way home. They've already announced the event, and a lot of people have already started looking for their offerings. Hien thinks it'll help if he learns a bit about the lost relatives, because it might help people to talk about the good parts of the deceased. He wants you to come with him since one of the Warrior of Light's many titles is the Liberator of Doma, and the people would probably be happy to have you there. In the meantime, Gosetsu has his own somewhat secret task to deal with, and although Hien's curious, he's not gonna pry. Another part of Hien's job is to bring the offerings to the temple, so after talking to the people and getting everything from a katana and a paintbrush to a very large jar of sake, the two of you get ready to head back, but first Hien wants to talk for a bit. He's realized that he's done a lot to ensure Doma's future, but he never took time to deal with the very troubled past. Without handling that, even if more people don't turn into monsters, they still won't be able to move forward. You can never be who you want to be if you're always looking over your shoulder at what could have been, and Hien's guilty of the same thing, and Gosetsu knew it. He claims to have heard the two of you talking, but knowing him, he was probably following Hien. Since he's been looking after the man since he was just a boy, he knows that from the moment his dad died, he's never had a moment to mourn. He had to become a leader, and that is more than a full-time job. But Gosetsu thinks that he should take part in the funeral rites and put his own demons to rest too. That's a good idea, and Hien agrees, but he wants to know why Gosetsu is wearing a sword again. The man can't exactly use it after he was shot, had a building fall on him, then got washed out to sea. He claims it's for peeling persimmons and heads off, but Hien knows that the man is training to help fight the blasphemy. It's a terrible idea in his condition, but the old man is pretty stubborn. Worrying about Gosetsu is just another way for Hien to avoid thinking about his father, but he can remember the day he died like it was yesterday. They had just taken Doma Castle, but they saw the banners of the 13th Legion heading toward them with Zenos at the head. Hien and Gosetsu had only just escaped when he heard that Zenos had killed his father. He saw Gosetsu break down and cry over the loss of his friend and leader, and Hien immediately felt the weight of his new position. It was hard to deal with, but he couldn't let anyone see him break down because they needed a leader. Because of that, he managed to get everyone out of there, and since then he hadn't had a chance to get over his father's death. But now he will, and to do that he needs to get his own keepsake for the funeral, which will take a bit of flying since it's hidden on a mountain. There was a tree up at Plum Springs that Hien's parents would bring him to when he was little, because it was a peaceful place that let him forget his worries for a while. That's where he hid something his father had given him, a small doll of Kishin Dashang, the monkey auspice, the one that Hien had tried to find so he could get his help getting rid of the Garleans. He buried it there when he hit adulthood as a part of his farewell to his mother. He thinks the toy would put a smile on his dad's face if he could see it again, which is what makes it a perfect offering. So the two of you head back to get ready for the ceremony, and of course there's still the blasphemy to deal with. Once the preparations are completed, you all get ready to head to the ceremony minus Gosetsu since he hurt himself during his training. All of the people of Isari show up to participate, and surprisingly enough, even Kisai shows up and apologizes for what she did. She had wanted to believe that her daughter hadn't become a monster, so she made some very bad choices, and she begs for forgiveness, as well as the chance to leave offerings for her lost loved ones. Ian agrees because he's genuinely a good man, but Kisai is not a good person, and she takes the opportunity to try and stab him. She clearly forgot that Yugiri was there, and the shinobi cuts her down before she can hurt Hien. That turns out to have been her plan all along, because her death causes Izanami to fly in and attack. The thing is strong and angry, which makes it way more difficult to deal with. The three of you aren't strong enough to bring it down, but when it gets ready to kill Hien, Gosetsu joins the fight, but not as a samurai. Apparently he's learned a new job on his pilgrimage and sports a staff, some talismans, and some very cool healing magics. Since your team now has a healer, you manage to bring down the blasphemy and finally let Minato rest in peace. Despite what she did, Hien will still give Kisai a proper burial and will put her family's belongings in the tomb with everyone else's. With the trouble dealt with, the funeral is allowed to take place. The people of Isari are finally able to grieve so they can move forward and guide Doma into a prosperous future. But that's Hien's job. Gosetsu once again heads off to master the job that will eventually become one of our healing jobs, while the Warrior of Light heads back to Razat Han to report that her mission was a success. In Razat Han, the delegate from Ishgard has been waiting for you. The effects of the final days has reached Ishgard, and one of the blasphemies has appeared in the Holy See. That's scary enough, but to make matters even worse, the blasphemy took on the form of a dragon. A dragon attacking Ishgard again really makes the people terrified, which will make more people turn into blasphemies, which means that thing needs to be dealt with quickly. Emmerich's been assembling a hunting party, but the fact that fear and despair can turn people into blasphemies limits the choices of people he has to join the hunt, which means a battle mage of your skill would be incredibly useful, and of course you're willing to help. So the delegate calls ahead so Lord Artoirel will be ready for you. Having you show up to fight is something both he and Emmerich are grateful for, and since they know you're busy dealing with the chaos that the final days has caused around the world, they get straight to the point. A few days ago, after the first blasphemy started appearing at Razat Han, and Elizan was seen wandering around the Hoplan. The way he moved was strange. Then all of a sudden he collapsed and turned into a dragon. As soon as people saw the change, their fear made them turn, and since there's no way to cure those who turn, the Temple Knights had to put them down. But the first blasphemy got away. To keep it simple, they named it Profane Fafnir after a dragon man from an old Ishgardian story. Since the day it flew away, it's been seen flying over Ishgard on more than one occasion. It doesn't attack, it just circles the city, creeping people out before it vanishes again. Every time it's seen, more people get scared and turn, then the cycle continues. The first thing Artoirel and his group have been doing is trying to find out who the first man who changed was, but they haven't learned all that much. But they have found something all of the people who turned have in common. They were all very devout members of the church, like priests or inquisitors. After Ishgard's dark secrets were revealed, everything the church stood for was called into question. A lot of Ishgardians had a hard time realizing that their beliefs were wrong, and the higher-ups in the church had more problems with that than most, which would make them more vulnerable to the transformations. Needless to say, Ishgard can't really handle any more chaos after only recently coming out of a 1,000-year-long war. So this needs to be resolved, and there's a member of the clergy named Clem that they were getting ready to go and talk to see if he can help. He was the only one who saw the dragon transformation and didn't turn. He's a deacon at the cathedral, so the three of you head there to see what he knows. Having three high-profile individuals come to see him is extremely out of the ordinary, but Clem is ready to help in any way that he can, so he gives you a rundown of everything that happened on the day the blasphemy appeared. The church was in the process of moving the vault's libraries to the cathedral. They were carrying some tomes over when they saw a young man staggering around before he transformed into a beast. As soon as the thing looked at them, they ran, but Clem saw the people who were with him start to change too, one after another until he was alone. As he retells you the story, Bishop Vartenwald shows up. He'd heard that the three of you were there, and he'd come to express his gratitude for the efforts you're all making in an attempt to save everyone. He also makes it known that he's willing to help in any way that he can. All you have to do is ask. Since the bishop is the head of St. Ramenos, he's a powerful ally to have. Now that Thornton is gone, he's the most powerful man in the church. Despite his power, Clem says the bishop hasn't let it go to his head. Clem is also more than willing to help, but he does need your help as well. After the transformation started, a group of clergymen fled the city in fear. They went and hid in the woods, but there's plenty of stuff out there to be scared of, so they may be more at risk of transforming out there than they would in the city. Clem will go search for them, but he can't exactly fight, so he needs some fighters to go with him. Of course, the three of you are willing to help. They headed out to the western highlands, so you all split up and search for them. You find them all, and they're surprisingly unharmed, but they refuse to come back to the city. Because of Emmerich and his revolution, the people of Ishgard hate the church. They shun them, and now it looks like people are causing the clergymen to turn into monsters, and the Inquisitor thinks that Emmerich has something to do with it. As he snaps at the man, it causes him to turn into a monster and he runs off. The others try to keep the remaining church folk calm while you run off to deal with the beast. It wasn't all that strong, so you bring it down pretty easily. While you were gone, Clem managed to convince the other clergymen to head back to the city, so you all escort them back so nothing eats them along the way. Back in Ishgard, Emmerich and Artoirel are still worried that the clergymen might turn like the Inquisitor, since they very likely want to return to the old days just like the Inquisitor had, which makes sense since the church has been in turmoil since the way they were manipulating the people was made public. And since faith was always important to the Ishgardians, the people are having a hard time getting over the betrayal. The clergy are having the hardest time getting over it, which has them in an unstable emotional state and makes them super vulnerable to the transformations. That knowledge doesn't do much to help with finding the blasphemy, so there's still a lot of work to be done. A little while later, after Deacon Clem gets the clergyman to talk, he comes by to tell the three of you what he's found out. Those particular clergymen were all close friends of the Inquisitor who turned, and like him, they'd experienced a lot of harassment in the city, and their experiences aren't unique. A lot of the clergy are openly hated by the people, and to some extent they deserve it, but they were misled too, so a lot of them were victims just like the rest of Ishgard. Since the Dragonsong War came to an end, peace came to the city for most, but the clergy pretty much lost everything. Knowing that they had been tools used to oppress the people did a number on them, and they didn't have anywhere to turn for guidance. But Clem thinks the church will redeem itself one day and once again be a beacon of hope for the people. That's what's kept him going, which is why, unlike some of the other clergy, he's avoided turning into a monster. The change takes people who feel a strong sense of despair, and most of Ishgard's people don't have many reasons to feel that way, which is why it's only the clergy who is really at risk. If the final days had happened during Nidhogg's attacks on the city, that would have been a completely different story. Since Clem has managed to hold off the transformations, Emmerich wants him to tell the other clergymen how to do the same thing, which should solve one problem. Now all that's left is to find Profane Fafnir's identity and deal with him. He wasn't a clergyman from what Clem had seen. He was dressed like a commoner. Bits and pieces of the person's personality stays behind when they become a blasphemy, so finding out what Fafnir spends most of his time doing could be another way to find out who he used to be, which will help stop him. There had to be more people at the Hoplon who could have seen Fafnir's transformation, and they may be able to tell you more about what the dragon did after it first transformed, which means there's more detective work to do. A lot of people saw the man who changed. His name was Vaindro, and he was a patient in the infirmary. Since he turned into a dragon, people assumed that he was a dragon blood drinking heretic. The fact that the man had the same name as a former member of the Heavens Ward is a bit interesting, but Sir Vaindro had retired when he got old a few years ago, so the man definitely isn't him. But the infirmary is at least a small lead that you can follow. Laverick, the aide who was in charge of the infirmary, has quite a bit to tell you about the lost patient. A patrol had found him out in the Central Highlands and had treated him before bringing him to the city. He was young and seemed healthy, but when he said his name was Vaindro, he didn't seem sure, but there was no way to confirm his identity at the time. Laverick wants you to find him because he's in no condition to be wandering around. Apparently the man didn't know that his lost patient had turned into a monster. He doesn't take the news well, but he does have some useful information that can help move your Scooby-Doo style monster hunt forward. While Vaindro was unconscious, he mentioned the Archbishop and Vartenoir a lot, which means it's possible that the two have actually had some dealings with one another that you should ask about. Emmerich decides it will be a good idea to request an audience with the man, just in case he does know something. The man agrees to see you all right away, but when you get to the congregation, Clem says the bishop had gotten called away on urgent business, so he headed off to the cathedral. He just left, so you rush off to catch the man because it's a little fishy that he set up a meeting with you, then just ran off. He's not hard to find. but he seems uncomfortable when you, Emmerich, Artoirel, and Clem show up. When Emmerich asks him about Vaindro, he says he doesn't know him, but you have a useful tool called the Echo that allows you to see into the bishop's past, which proves he's lying. You see the bishop and 2 clergymen out in Oz's Law, where he was trying to recreate the ritual that gave Thornton his primal powers. He hadn't believed what Emmerich had said to be true at first, but he'd found Thornton's journal, and he had written about how all you needed was a lot of ether and prayers of the people to make gods out of men. There's plenty of ether in Oz's Law, and he brought Thornton's sword as well as a corpse to channel the power into, which seems like a brilliant thing to do. But he hopes to bring back Thornton and his knights to restore Ishgard to its former glory. He doesn't realize just how much ether was used to transform Thornton, and he doesn't have nearly enough. All that they do is change the corpse into what looks like a regular, not dead, but very weak man. He mutters about protecting his eminence, but falls over. Vartenoy decides to go check Thornton's journal to see what he did wrong, and as for the failed summon, he decides to leave it there for the creatures of Oz's Law to deal with. When you tell Emmerich what you saw, he immediately goes to arrest the bishop. The man snaps, and to nobody's surprise, he transforms right in the middle of the city, only to get brought down by Emmerich. This is a serious blow for Deacon Clem, so Artoirel decides to stay with the man until he's sure he won't turn, while you head back to the congregation to wait for him with Emmerich. Seeing the bishop turn actually makes Clem more motivated to help the other clergymen, so that's a good thing. But the fact that one of the highest ranking members of the church could be so emotionally messed up that they would turn proves just how bad the current situation is. Emmerich thinks that it could in fact be partially his fault for pushing so hard to separate the church and state, which divided the people even faster. But Artoirel is more interested in hearing about your vision than Emmerich's self-doubt. The fact that the bishop tried to use Allegan tech to summon a primal makes Artoirel mad enough to where if the man wasn't dead already, he probably would have killed him. But the fact that it failed and summoned a man who had the desire to protect the archbishop is proof that they didn't have enough ether for the true summoning, which is obvious because they had Nidhogg's Eye the last time they had tried that. And since you dealt with the Warring Triad, their ether wasn't in Oz's Law either. But even though there wasn't enough ether, they did have all of the parts they needed for the spell, which is why they did summon the very weak champion that they got. The real question is, how did the man end up in the Central Highlands, because he is very likely your target. Emmerich sends out some temple knights to find the clergymen who helped the bishop's summoning, and as soon as they found them, they turned and were dealt with, which will make it difficult to find out if the clone is the man who became the dragon. So instead, Emmerich wants to follow the man's trail from Oz's Law to see how he got to Kurthus. Of course, that's only if you get there and the clone's body isn't where the bishop left it. Artoirel decides to go check out Oz's Law, while you and Emmerich head to Camp Dragonhead, where the man was supposedly taken after he was found. On the day the stranger was found, one of the guards at the camp had seen an airship flying way too low before it disappeared in a snowstorm. When they brought the man in from Providence Point where they found him, he was suffering from some serious frostbite. They did the little they could for him before they sent him to the city. The stories Emmerich heard pretty much match yours, so Emmerich wants to find this crashed airship, and he's hired some chocobo to fly the two of you around. It doesn't take long for the two of you to find the downed airship. What you didn't expect was to find the blasphemy lying down beside it. The echo hits you and you see the clone stumble out of the ship before passing out and waking up in the hospital in Ishgard. He couldn't remember his name, but the only names floating around in his head were those of the Heavensward, probably because they tried to use him to summon Thornton and all of the knights like they were one primal. That bishop really had no idea how primals worked. None of the names fit him until he saw an image of the old knight Vaindro in his mind. The memory showed the man being too lowborn to ever be the leader of the Temple Knights like he wanted, but the Archbishop gave him a position at his side, and from that day forward he pledged his very life to the man. It's only then that he remembers that he's a knight of the Heavensward. When he tells Lovric that, the man had told him that the Heavensward hadn't been seen for a while and everyone believes they're dead, but the Archbishop is definitely dead. That news seems to shatter Vaindro's mind, because there's no way he could be alive if Thornton wasn't, since he was sworn to give his life to keep the man that way. So he heads out to find the Archbishop, which leads to him turning and bringing you back to your current situation. You snap out of the vision in time to see Fafnir flying over you and Emmerich. He says something about the glory of King Thornton and flies off. Your visions really happen at the worst possible times, but at least you didn't die, so the two of you head back to Ishgard to let Artoirel know what you found, and what you saw. On his trip to Oz's Law, the only thing Artoirel found was Thornton's sword, Ascalon, which confirms that the blasphemy is in fact the clone, So Emmerich lets the man know about the crashed airship that the clone probably found in Oz's Law, which pretty much ties together the last threads of how this all started. Even though the Heavens Ward were a big source of the problems in Ishgard, leaving a twisted dragon version of one of them flying around isn't something that Emmerich wants to do, especially since it will cause more people to turn if the truth behind this event comes out, and adds to the issues between the people and the church. The reasons they have bad blood between them don't need to be forgotten, but they do need to find a unified path forward. That thought makes Emmerich decide to call for an ecumenical council so the church can write out their new doctrine so people can know that they have a new role separate from what used to be. Obviously that won't fix things, but it's a start. Despite the ecumenical council being the most important formal gathering the church can call, one that hasn't happened in 80 years, the people gather for it fast. The event is normally sealed to only the top officials, but since Vartanwar is very dead, this one is open to the public, which gives every citizen of Ishgard the right to have a say in how the church will conduct itself in the future. Since the founding of the church, it served the people in two ways. It was meant to fight the dragons and protect the souls of the people. But since man and dragon are at peace, half of their purpose is gone, so they have to decide how they can better serve the people. As with everything political, there are differing opinions, but after a lot of arguing back and forth, which is bad since that could cause people to turn into monsters, Emmerich does what he does best and gives a speech that helps the people get their stuff together. Their legends did hide betrayal and lies, but it wasn't all bad, so the church needs to accept the blame and get over it. The church was the foundation of the nation, so there's no way to tear it down and keep everything functioning, so the regular folk need to get over that. That way they can keep their history, who they are, and still grow together, which is something they can all agree on. It'll be a long road, but at least they're willing to walk it together. Emmerich's meeting turns out to be a success, which means you can get back to dealing with Fafnir, and Emmerich had Clem get something for him that he thinks will be very useful in dealing with the blasphemy. Since the thing's instinct is to protect the Archbishop, that could explain why it randomly flies over Ishgard. It's keeping watch over the vault where Fury's Grace, the staff of the Archbishop, was supposed to be. If Emmerich runs around holding that, then Fafnir will definitely come to him, which will make it easy to draw him away and deal with him. As long as Emmerich can avoid getting eaten first. It's a stupid risk for someone as important as Emmerich to take. There's a reason why you don't send your generals out to fight wars. People might not like to say it, but there are some people who are more valuable than others, and Emmerich is far more valuable to Ishgard than a common temple knight. But he thinks he has to be the one to do this, which means you have to keep him alive. Sure enough, when Emmerich holds the staff and calls out for his knights, Fafnir shows up, but when he realizes that Emmerich isn't Thornton, he attacks. The blasphemy is no pushover, especially since he's able to use the magic of a lot of the Heavens Ward members, but you fought them all before, so you, Emmerich, and Artoirel are more than capable of bringing down the beast, and finally putting an end to the tale of the Heavens Ward, and allowing them to rest, and Ishgard to move forward toward what should be a brighter future. This concludes the story of Endwalker's Magic DPS questline. If you enjoyed this video, do the YouTube stuff. Hit the like button, subscribe, ding that notification bell, join the Discord, and if you really want to show your support, sign up to become a member of the channel. Until next time guys, later.